Hi, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Sabbath Collective. We're a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of the Bible. Hey, Sarah, good to see you, honey. Hey, Lisa and Andy, great to see you. Hey, Barika, Shabbat Shalom. So tonight we're going to really take a look at a fascinating subject, especially in light of what's happening in our world. And that is, what does an idol look like? And I mean, when we ask ourselves that question, a couple of years ago we may have said, well, we don't have idolatry any longer. But today, obviously, in our political and religious world, we see plenty of idols. And so we're really going to break down what does an idol look like. Now, before we get into that, I want to tell you two things, and these are facts. Fact. Humans will worship something, and we need to all recognize that and know it. Humans will worship something. And the reason for that is because we've actually been designed by God to do so. You could say it's in our DNA to do so. So humans will definitely worship something, and that's a fact. And so we just become, the second fact, what we worship. So humans will worship something, that's a fact, and we will become what we worship, and that is also a fact. So we have to understand that moving forward, sorry, my Siri is talking to me here, and she's really, do you ever realize that you can't hardly get Siri to shut up? That's my problem right now. So we will worship something, and we will become like what we worship. And so that is our reality. So if you ask the average Jewish or Muslim person to share stories about Abram, you'll most likely hear a really interesting story about how Abraham's father, Terah, was a seller of idols. And one day, Abraham, as a young boy, smashed the idols in his father's shop. And there was a bit of sarcasm in the story. Now, this story of the smashing idols doesn't actually appear anywhere in the Tanakh. We actually know this from the Midrash in Rabbah 38. The Midrash is a sort of text that explains to and explores the Tanakh. So there's a similar story of young Abraham smashing idols in the Quran as well, in Surah 6 and 21. So both of these texts suggest that Abraham's selection by God did not come out of nowhere. As Genesis 12, we may sometimes understand by reading that. But rather, these two texts explore the thought that Abraham had independently come to a point where he connected to monotheistic worship, one God, and he rejected idolatry, which is interesting because we have to wonder, why did God pick Abraham? So let's look at the text for tonight. It's Exodus 20, verses 2 through 5a. And it says this: "You are to have no other gods before me. You are not to make for yourselves a carved image or any kind of representation of anything in heaven above, on the earth beneath." By the way, you have a truncated form here. "On the earth beneath, or in the water below the shoreline. You are not to bow down to them or serve them." So this is one of the texts. There's also one in Deuteronomy as well that kind of explores what idolatry is. Bow down and serve. Now, let me just tell you this. Hey, Aaron, great to see you. Let me just tell you this as far as bowing down and serving idols. There are volumes of books on what an idol can be and what an idolater does. And I know tonight's teaching is an extremely ambitious attempt to condense what probably should be 3 months of teaching into about 30 minutes. And there is absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to address every what about that you have. What about this? What about this? So I'm going to ask you, hey Maureen, good to see you. Hey Rebecca, Great to see you. So I'm going to ask you to write in the comments if you have questions or thoughts or comments, and we're not getting to them tonight. I promise you I will respond to them, and other people probably will as well. Hey, Redell, great to see you. Shabbat Shalom. So again, let's simplify this text then. We're going to look at what David Foreman points out from this text. That the word translated gods is Elohim, and while it can be translated gods, the plural of El, it is also rightly understood as power or powers. So in Egypt, the gods were really regarded not as persons with human attributes, but as powers. The gods were actually not affected by human concerns or emotions at all, which was what made them so scary and unpredictable. Foreman suggests that this commandment is not about the priority of Yod-He, Vav-He over other gods. So in other words, we're not talking about God is up here, Yahweh is up here, and then God number 2, God number 3, and God number 4. He's saying that's not what this is talking about. It is rather, this text, a commandment not to let any other competing power take priority or be an object of worship. A competitor meaning something that has conflicting values, or even values that seem similar but are not actually him. And worship, to simplify this, to bow and to serve. And by the way, we're doing a series about what do words look like, and I will do in the near future, what does worship look like. I don't have time to get into that tonight when we're talking about idols, but I will talk about it. But basically, to simplify it, it means to bow or to serve, and it means to give something that kind of priority in your life. Another interesting thing about this text is the phrase to have other gods. In English, it suggests some kind of possession, so I own it. But literally, it's the Hebrew word haya, and it suggests that it's something that you make with your own hands to reveal something of your own work. And again, the symbol of the hand or the yod means a human effort. Hey, Rebecca. Oh, hey, Derek. Great to have you with us. Good to have you both watching tonight and joining us. So in the book Divine Images and Human Imaginations in Ancient Greece and Rome, it says this: people understood that the statue or the idol was not the real God. That the statue was like a gateway to a God, getting the people what they wanted. And I'm going to talk about a lot of unrelated things in the beginning, but log them in because they all connect to the images we're going to look through tonight. So the issue of idolatry is so important that Hebrew actually has 14 words for idol. A whole tractate of the Talmud, Avodah Zarah, is devoted to the laws against idolatrous practices. And not only idolatry itself was treated with the greatest severity by the rabbis, but anything at all connected to it was strictly prohibited, which is what the food sacrifice to idols issue Paul dealt with was about. So anything other than Yahweh that demands absolute devotion in attitude or action is an idol, if you're with me on that. Anything other than Yahweh that demands absolute devotion in attitude or action is an idol. Now, before we get into that, let me just qualify, because you know I have to do this. Writer Madeleine L'Engle, in her book Penguins and Golden Calves, speaks of the difference between icons and idols. And I just want to give you a little bit of a balance here. She writes that icons are not similes. True icons are not reflections, but metaphors. They are created things that act like windows or doors into the presence of the divine. A sunset or stars are icons, she says. A piece of art that someone gives you that is precious is an icon. Icons are humans' attempt to understand an infinite creator. Now, these images, these icons I'm using tonight, they can either be icons or idols. It's all about how the person relates to it. A person makes an icon an idol. Are you with me? Are you tracking? It's the person that makes an icon an idol. So let's begin, before we get into these, into a healthy way to relate to a very sensitive imagery that is not idolatry. Because what we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be very emotionally impacting, okay? They're emotional images. And so when we talk about making them an idol, it makes some people get nervous because they ask, well, aren't we supposed to respect them and aren't we supposed to revere them? So I want to begin by giving you a story about something that was very sacred, so to speak, very important, very emotionally charged, but not treated like an idol. And in my experience, I saw that in the Yad Vashem in Israel. Now, the Yad Vashem is Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. And it is, in their own words, it is dedicated to preserving the memory of the dead, honoring Jews who fought against the Nazi oppressors, and Gentiles who selflessly aided Jews in need, and researching the phenomenon of the Holocaust in particular and genocide in general, with the aim of avoiding such events in the future. So this is the museum's purpose, okay? And it is filled with things similar to when I told you about when I went to the slave fortress in Ghana. As soon as you go into the space, you feel it. So in general, with the aim is what they're looking for of avoiding such events in the future. So they made this museum not only to remember those who were lost and paid a price, but to avoid the events happening in the future. So I had the privilege of seeing this about 10 years ago with my son Ryan. And he's actually saying the same thing. It's the most powerful place he's ever seen. Hey, Kate, great to have you with us. Shabbat Shalom out in Cali. I know it's early there. It's one of the most powerful places I've ever seen. So while I'm on this tour, there was a group from Germany with a tour guide that was German, who was speaking both in English and German so I could understand the English that he was saying. And he was taking his own German tour, that were German people, through the Yad Vashem. But I heard him saying these extremely disrespectful places, like the phrase, for instance, in one of the rooms, there was a pile of shoes that were the shoes of those who were murdered. Obviously not all of them, but a lot of them. And just seeing those shoes in the Yad Vashem made your heart stop, because people were wearing these at one time and they were murdered. And so all of the images, all of the rooms were very, very impactful. So he walks into this one room and here's what he says. These are the shoes of the people who died. Hey, Jean, Shabbat Shalom, good to see you. And these are the shoes of the people who died. Okay, that's what he said. And the word villages is what he used instead of anything from Nazi concentration camps to prisons. And other phrases that didn't include the words genocide, prison, or gas chambers, or Nazis. So I was very upset because I was watching this German group with this German guide, and I just became really agitated, like I sometimes do. And I asked a guide about how they allowed people to have that kind of freedom for revisionist history at the worst, or a really extreme denial and deflection at the least, in such a sacred space. And I'll never forget the words she said to me. She said, "This is not a place of worship. It is a place of remembrance. Those memories are strong enough to speak for themselves. Can't you feel that?" And it hit me. Yes, I can. So this is how one can have veneration, would be a word, which means respect or even awe, for something or some place, but not make it an idol. You see, if the Yad Vashem was an idol, they may not allow German tour guides to do the tour. And if the Yad Vashem was an idol, they may criticize everyone who didn't relate to it the way they thought you should. You see, they revered it, but they didn't idolize it. Now, there are all kinds of idols in our culture, and I'm only doing a couple tonight. I wish I had time to do more. I'm only doing a couple. There are money idols in our culture. There are power idols in our culture. There are celebrity idols in our culture. I'm only tonight going to look at a few political, religious-y ones that have been used recently. And we see these symbols behind politicians and in their hands, and we see them quoting these things and wielding these things, and we are seeing this patriotism mixed with religion, and it has become this kind of new hybrid of nationalism. And by the way, if you missed the teaching I did on leaven, I highly suggest watching that, because it talks about the hybrid, what happens when things get mixed. So we're going to look at three things tonight as people make them idols. Not that they themselves are idols, not that they themselves are wrong or bad, but it's how some people relate to them. The first thing we see, those who worship the Bible make the Bible their idol. Ooh, I know this is making some people nervous. In August of 2017, there was a rabbi by the name of Chaim Chlorfin, and he published an article entitled, and again, this is 2017, How to Save the USA in 10 Easy Lessons. And he suggests that since the United States has abandoned Torah, it is bound for collapse. And can I just say, Western Christians would agree with this rabbi and say something similar like, ever since we've taken prayer out of the classroom, we've been doomed. Okay? Same line of thinking. The rabbi says only a return to Torah can save the USA. And he begins the article by insisting that Israel's concealment or hiding of the Ark of the Covenant, which actually went missing at the destruction of the first temple, has the same parallels. Now, follow me here, track with me here, because this is really what we see today. In his opinion, the Ark of the Covenant, was, in his words, I quote, the temple's life force, its reason for being. He suggests that because it was concealed, all of the subsequent destructive empires were able to take over and overrun Israel. And in parallel, once the United States began removing the Ten Commandments as public declarations, America's rejection of the Ten Commandments has sealed its doom, he says. Now, I'm sure many Western Christians read this article and said, yes and amen. However, along with most rabbinic scholars in the commentaries as they relate to the purpose of the Ark of the Covenant, I strongly and respectfully disagree with the rabbi. In fact, God was very plain as to why Israel would be defeated, and it had everything to do with their relationship and obedience to him. 1 Samuel 4 shows us this. When the Israelite army was defeated, they were determined that it was because the ark was not in their presence. Again, the ark was something to be revered, like we talked about in the beginning, but not idolized. So the Israelites said, we got defeated because the ark wasn't in our presence. So they went and got it, and then again they went into battle, and they were defeated by the Philistines with 30,000 men dying. As the Israelites were fighting the Philistines and believing that the ark guaranteed their protection and success, it didn't. The ark is a symbol of Adonai's devotion to Israel, but it isn't Adonai. Do you see how we make these connections? right? With nationalism, with patriotism, with imagery. And we've been doing it for thousands of years. Many westernized Christians tend to worship the scriptures rather than the God of the scriptures. We talk about putting Bible reading in public schools. Honestly, I'd rather have no Bible taught than the Bible taught incorrectly and used as a weapon. Politicians quote scripture. Many have made the Bible an idol. And if you don't think the Bible is an idol to some Christians, question the Bible's inerrancy. In other words, the inerrancy question is every single word in our modern Bible without mistake, without error? No, it is not. When we question the Bible's inerrancy, people's head explode, as if faith in God or God himself depends on some kind of infallible document. When in fact, our modern Bibles are loaded with inaccuracy, mistranslations, and biases from both sexist and racist translators. Now, hear me. Yes, the Bible needs veneration. You remember that word we used, reverence and awe. And the fact that even with these things, it still to this day, thousands of years later, serves to point us to know the Lord. Well, that speaks of its power. But just like the ark, it will not save us. Not even if we print the Ten Commandments over every freaking building in this country. Abraham Heschel reminds us that Yahweh manifests himself in events rather than in things. So let me ask you this. What events are happening now that would invite the Lord's presence among us? Where do we see him coming? Ryan's saying he almost got kicked out of university because he went to a Christian university for asking about that. Yes, if you ever doubt that the modern translation of the Bible is an idol, question the inerrancy. And again, God is not threatened by this. So if you have this experience, give me the thumbs up. Let me see your experience, especially when it comes to translation. Put it in the comments. Let me see if you have this as well. The second thing that we see that people make idols. Those who worship the cross make the cross their idols. And again, let me qualify just in case you're joining us late. As I said in the very beginning, it's not that I'm saying these particular images or other images like them are idols or it's wrong to revere them. But it's people that make icons idols. So let me say this again. Those who worship the cross make the cross their idol. Now, where I live in Florida, as in a lot of open areas with big highways, Barika's saying she got in trouble in her school as well. There are big, huge crosses. In Florida on the highways, these are the biggest crosses I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I want to say they're 100 feet tall. I mean, they're just massive crosses everywhere. It's almost like there's a competition which church or could have the biggest cross. So let's trace the roots of the cross, okay? Because if we're going to treat something like that, let's know where it comes from. In a common sense kind of way, okay? So the crucifixion cross was a brutal, torturous implement of death devised by a brutal, torturous government, similar to the electric chair today, okay? And it was used to control people groups that wouldn't submit to the authority of the government, marginalized people groups especially, that wouldn't commit. Ooh, that sounds just like the electric chair too, doesn't it? Yes, the Messiah willingly gave up his life on the cross. The implement of torture that was used, however, isn't the point. It is the sinless sacrifice and the resurrection that's the point. So yes, the cross was used But that's not the focus of our attention. So why did the cross itself get so much emotional currency as to become an idol for many? Well, let me give you a little bit of history. The cross imagery was never part of the early Messianic movement. The cross as a Christian symbol cannot be found prior to Constantine's dream of conquest under the sign of the cross. And the crucifix with the Savior attached to it appeared somewhere in the 5th century. And it was actually meant to bring an imagery of bloody violence. It was used as a symbol in the separation, the sort of anti-Semitic divide that was ushered in by the Roman Church and the government. That was the cross's roots. The Hebraic roots of the Christian faith was literally cut away with the blade of political power. And the cross was instrumental in that. The divide was made between Gentiles following Yeshua, whose Hebrew name they changed to Jesus, and the Jewish followers of the Messiah. The cross was a political symbol used to control. And Jewish people were not only viciously discriminated against, but were tortured and killed by Christians brandishing crosses. Country after country would forcibly expel their Jewish populations unless they converted to Christianity and bow, the clash under the sign of the cross. A Jewish writer from the Middle Ages, Joseph Sephardi, fled with his family from Germany to Turkey, and he described, and I quote, the happy lot of the Jews under the crescent as compared with their hard fate under the shadow of the cross. Historian Shlomo Schechter wrote that the lands of Christendom were places where, and I quote, love was preached and murder acted. During the Crusades, some Jewish and Muslim people had crosses carved into their backs with swords. And needless to say, the Nazis considered themselves to be Christians and used the symbol of the cross. In this country, the burning cross was used by the KKK and other racist groups as they whipped and lynched and terrorized people of color. It's still, to this day, when you speak to older people of color, they will tell you when they see a big giant cross in someone's yard, a chill goes down their spine. So the cross began as a tool to control, and it seems to have continued that way. There were a lot of symbols that can be used for faith and were used in the 1st century church for faith. The open tomb, a shepherd with a lamb, all kinds of symbols. And even if you want to use a cross, that's absolutely fine. Again, the idolatry comes with how you relate to it. But just realize this about the cross, it's not the perfect and only symbol of faith and should not be an idol. Are you with me on that? Randall and Ryan are talking. Could it be white supremacy? Yes, absolutely. Same thing, it's to control, right? It's used to control. So we see the Bible can be used as an idol. We see the cross can be used as an idol. And again, hear me, I'm not saying those things are idols. I'm saying how people relate to them can be idolatry, and they can make them idols. And the last thing I want to look at is the flag. Those who worship the U.S. flag make the flag their idol. I don't know if Mike Bartell is still watching or not, but when we pastored at a church together, one of the first things that we did was remove the American flag from the stage, and Mike and his wife Denise came up to me and said, wow, we have a flag up there. Are we gathering under the American flag, or are we gathering under the banner of God? Yeah. And what you saw is how people reacted when they make the flag an idol. Watch what happens when you try to remove it from the stages of their churches. We've all seen the emotion in what taking a knee as respectful protest during the flag and anthem ceremonies in sports has produced. But just like those gray areas we talked about with the modern Bible and the cross, let's connect to the roots of what's happening. Let's also look at the history and even the recent backstory of what happens with the flag. And you may not be aware of this. You probably are, because I think you're all a pretty woke group. But the recent backstory has to do with the flag being used as a marketing tool. The Department of Defense paid out millions to the NFL for things like military flyovers, flag unfurlings, emotional color guard ceremonies, and national anthem performances. And it was for the purpose of enlistment campaigns. So the owners get all this money for having this sort of political parade. Additionally, the NFL policy on players standing for the national anthem also changed in 2009 when the athletes were encouraged to participate. Prior to that, teams were not given any specific instructions on the matter. Some chose to remain in the locker room until after opening ceremonies were completed. That's the purpose, that's the foundation of those ceremonies at sports games. Of course, marketing, right? People are emotional, it's a national pastime, sports. But just so we put things into perspective here, people were upset because players took a knee to raise awareness about racism. But why is kneeling such a terrible violation? Let's quickly look at the flag and its codes. Kneeling during the national anthem is not mentioned at all in the U.S. flag code. It is referenced in a section under patriotic customs, Title 36 of Chapter 10, and it says all present except those in uniform should stand at attention facing the flag with the right hand over the heart. So that's a patriotic customs code. So this prayerful protest violates the patriotic customs, but there's nothing about the flag codes. And I'm sure you've seen the hypocrisies, like, for instance, the man sitting on the flag, on the American flag, with the t-shirt saying, "I stand for the flag," right? We've all seen them. In Section 8 of the Flag Code, Respect for the Flag, Article C says that the flag should never be carried flat or horizontally, but always aloft and free. So before most NFL games, the flag is being disrespectful, and when it's coming out on the field, it is as well. The U.S. Code Title 4, Chapter 1, under Respect for the Flag, follow me here, the flag should never be used for advertising purposes in any manner whatsoever. That's the flag code. It should not be embroidered on any such articles as cushions or handkerchiefs and the like. No part of the flag should ever be used as a costume or any kind of athletic uniform. So we actually violate the code for respect for the flag all the time. It's okay for one person to drink a beer with a flag on it, wear a shirt with a flag on it, carry a backpack with a flag on it, wear a hat with a flag on it, and sit on a beach towel with a flag on it. Would it suggest then that it's subjective worship and it depends on who you are? That's why they're upset. And I want to go into something, maybe some of you know it, maybe some of you have never heard it, have never heard that before. Randall is saying flags are symbols that have become idolized. Exactly. This is exactly the point, Randall. Co-sign on that. So here's something somewhat alarming. It's an alarming part of the code. And you can look this code up for yourself. And for those of you who are members, and I post this teaching and you can get on the PDF, you can see all the codes there and look them up. The legal code regarding the flag specifically says in letter J, the flag represents a living country and is itself considered a living thing. I'm not making that up. the flag code says about itself, it is considered a living thing. So, let me see if I can recap the flag here. Humans take some material and make something that represents something. Then humans claim it's alive and act as though it is. Then humans become enraged when others don't relate to it through their subjective behaviors of honoring. That pretty much sums it up. The biblical text that comes to mind with this was the mockery of idol worshipers in Isaiah 44. And I'm going to paraphrase verse 16. It says, you chop down a tree, you use half of it to make fire and cook your food, and turn the other half into something that you claim is alive and then treat it as such. And then verse 20 goes on and says, then you fall down before it and worship it and pray to it. Save me, you say, for you are my God. Now, that sounds ridiculous in Isaiah, right? It's mocking what we do to make things gods. It's sort of irrational, isn't it? That's because someone chooses to make an object of worship and gather under its protection. It's a God that others should worship, is what is projected, in the way that they say so. But the contradictions and hypocrisies are everywhere. The flag, to many, is most definitely an idol. And in the codes, if you were to just take that one line, the code, the flag code itself, is calling itself an idol. Because I don't know about y'all, but I do not say that the flag is living. Try removing it again and see how people react. And think about that competing part of the idolatry, which is what we talked about in the very beginning. When people gather together under an American flag. As Zach Hunt writes, what makes patriotism an idol in the church and not just bad theology or bad storytelling is that the political theology it brings with it can push out the need for Jesus and leave no space for the gospel. Sure, there are some hints of Jesus still lingering around, but when American Christianity takes over the gospel and the gospel gets refined in the fires of patriotism, the story of the empire ultimately wins out and becomes a new story of faith. We may continue to profess allegiance to Jesus, but our lives tell a much different story. One in which the gospel has become supplanted by American political ideology, such that theology seems strangely like a political agenda. When this happens, debates begin to rage about caring for the poor, the sick, and the immigrant, debates which would be incomprehensible in any other era of the church. It's a great quote. We see the same danger in Zionism today. And unlike the USA, Israel actually is a chosen nation by God. But when people put the country over the Lord, there was problems and there are problems. Because even a chosen nation can be idolatrous. Now, out of my family of 7 I was born into, 4 of us served in the military. I understand love of country. I understand military service. But patriotism does not have to be idolatrous. If you care about the country you live in, as James Baldwin says, exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. You can be patriotic, but not blindly pledge an allegiance to political leaders or political parties and demand that other people worship at your idols. Miroslav Volf, who's a Croatian theologian who watched his homeland in the former Yugoslavia torn apart as nationalistic rebels, nationalistic religious leaders legitimized the ethnic conflict. So in other words, there was this cleansing, ethnic cleansing, and it was legitimized by religious leaders. And here's what Miroslav Volf writes. Our coziness with the surrounding culture has made us so blind to many of its evils that instead of calling them into question, we offer our own versions of them in God's name and with a good conscience. And that's exactly what idol worship does. So let me sum this up. And then I know I haven't interacted with you a lot tonight. I'm going to read every one of your comments, and I know you're seeing each other's comments. Here's what I choose to believe, that although there are some very evil people, some of them at the highest levels, with evil agendas and the ability to manipulate and lie and control, and they neither protect this country nor the people in it. That is a fact. I believe that. But I also believe that there are a lot of people that are being spun into fear and mistrust and inundated with misinformation in this environment that has been produced, a lot of it by external factors of chaos. And these people are to the point of exhaustion. And here's the thing. In order to do the good in each situation, we need to stay open to seeing and seeking truth. We need to be committed to being constant learners. And this is why I love and appreciate you all, because we all are. We cannot allow our hearts to be closed off, even when we're committed to something. If we close ourselves off to the world, we live in our own prisons of darkness. We must choose to learn and to love. And it is as learners and lovers that we challenge and we resist. What is important for us to care about? Yeshua condensed the commandments when he addressed the question in Luke 10:27. He says, you are to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your understanding, and your neighbor as yourself. If you're doing these things, you're not able to have idols. In his last book of poetry published before his death, and again, this is referencing the very first example that I gave in the beginning. If you missed this, you can go back and listen to it. It's the story that's recorded in both Muslim and Jewish ancient texts, and it suggests that Abraham cleansed his father's store of temples because Abraham's father was a temple worshiper. And here's what Yehuda Amakai wrote, again an Israeli poet. He writes this: we are all children of Abraham, but also the grandchildren of Terah, Abraham's father. And maybe it's high time the grandchildren did unto their father as Abraham did unto his, when he shattered his idols and images, his religion, his faith. That too would be the beginning of a new religion. So we close this time with the lighting of the Shavuos candles. And traditionally, the mothers of the home light the candles, and the Sabbath candles are symbols of unity, of peace, and of joy. And then traditionally, she encircles the flames with her hands 3 times as a gesture that welcomes in the Sabbath. And then she prays as she covers her eyes from the flames, which is a symbol of ending all work. Blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart by his commandments, who has given us Yeshua the Messiah, and has sent us to be a light to the world. The Lord is our light and our salvation. May his light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth and the radiance of joy. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.